My name's Rachel Ciano, and we're going to be reading from Daniel chapter 7 today. So grab your Bibles and open up to Daniel chapter 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven, churning up the great sea. Four great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, 'Get up and eat your fill of flesh.' After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed."
There's a big surf running in Sydney at the moment. A big storm system moved through a couple of days ago and left some huge seas crashing upon the Sydney coastline. I received a text a couple of days ago from a friend, and she said, "I heard the waves were big and I imagined you were amongst it." And I read the text and I felt a little bit of guilt and shame. And I appreciated her great confidence in my abilities, but there was no way I was going out in the water that day. I checked it, and the waves were triple, quadruple overhead for those couple of surfers who happened to brave the water. Yeah, there were some places where the swell would be a bit smaller, but they were crowded, and I just didn't feel like going out on a wild and windy winter's day in Sydney. Every time I check the surf with my friends, when the swell is up, there's always a risk. And there's always a risk which I have to weigh against my abilities and my fitness and my motivation. And I usually surf with a group of guys and girls that are quite a bit younger than me. And they're always keen. They're always pushing me and inviting me and making sure I'm motivated to get out there. But there's always a risk. And I always have to judge whether or not I should go out in certain conditions, whether or not it's safe enough, whether or not my enjoyment is going to be matched by the risk. When I venture out, when any of us venture out into big surf, our safety is not guaranteed. We surf together. We very rarely surf alone. And yet yesterday, when I was looking at this massive surf on the beaches in Sydney, there were only a couple of guys out in one spot, and in another spot there was someone all on his own, catching these monster waves. And I thought, that guy is not only brave, but I wouldn't be him, not surfing by myself. There's always a risk, and our safety's not guaranteed. You don't have to be a surfer in 2021 in Sydney and in most parts of the world to realise that our safety is not guaranteed. Everything I did this morning felt strange. Even the things that are usually normal reminded me of threat. Even getting dressed up to come to college, putting shoes on that I had to dust off, cleaning my car out and making sure there was fuel. I haven't filled it up in a few months now. Everything I did, making sure that there was a mask, making sure I had my proper documentation, getting in the car and coming here, reminded me of threat and risk, and that our safety is not guaranteed. The empty roads, the empty sidewalks, the closed shops, all of these things are reminders that our safety is not guaranteed. And for some of us, we were acutely aware of this well before 2021. For some of us, other events have happened to us and to those who we love that remind us that we aren't on a trajectory, we aren't on a course where everything always turns out okay. That there's trouble and hardship and grief and loss. And unfortunately, many of us have carried that into 2021, and many of us have experienced it in the midst of all of the other pressures that this year's brought. Daniel 7 is written to a people who are struggling in exile. And Daniel 7 is a message for them and for us. And perhaps strangely, it's a message they need to hear that reminds them that their safety is not guaranteed. Their safety is not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed even for God's people, and perhaps it's not guaranteed especially for God's people. There are particular threats that we saw in the text today that remind us that our safety is not guaranteed as God's people. Which might be a little strange when we think about Daniel 1-6 and we think about all that God has done for Daniel and his friends in the last few chapters. That he's rescued them from plots against them. That he's miraculously rescued them out of fire and out of the mouths of lions. That he's blessed them and that he's protected them in the midst of a hostile empire. But as we were reminded last week in Daniel chapter 6, the rescue of Daniel is no guarantee that God, in his great power and care, is always going to save us from every circumstance. Daniel chapter 7 is a reminder to the readers that their safety isn't guaranteed, especially for those who are followers of God, especially for those who are faithful to him. Daniel 7 marks a shift in the book, in the story, a shift from these courtroom narratives that describe the thinking of kings and the plotting of those against God's people in exile. God's relationship with particular people. And now we see in Daniel 7 a shift from these narrative stories to these apocalyptic visions and dreams. We have a shift from Daniel as this gifted interpreter, bringing interpretations of dreams and visions to the kings, to Daniel, who's now receiving dreams and visions that he doesn't understand. Dreams and visions that need to be interpreted for him by angelic messengers. It's a shift from narrative to apocalyptic, to great and troubling imagery of beasts and kingdoms, multifaceted animals that have wings and teeth that seem to be an amalgam of different creatures that we're familiar with. They're vivid images that are supposed to impress upon us these truths that they're trying to communicate. And in the midst of all this, we go from seeing God protecting his people at every step of the way in Daniel 1-6 to these troubling and distressing images of Daniel chapter 7. And if you look at verse 15, you'll see that this is Daniel's exact response. I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. Now, this is understandable. If we just think for a moment about what Daniel experienced. He was asleep, it's late at night, it's dark, and he finds himself in a very vivid dream. Verse 1, a vision passed through my mind as he was lying in bed. He had a dream. And the dream, it's a nightmare. He finds himself on the surface of a raging sea with the winds howling around, the four winds coming from the four corners of the earth. And out of this raging sea rises four beasts. And with each beast that arises, the image gets more and more disturbing. From a lion with its wings torn off to a bear feasting on fresh ribs with meat stuck between its teeth, to a third beast, a leopard with four wings and four heads, and then to a final beast. And this beast, we don't get much of a description of it, other than Daniel saw its teeth. He saw its iron teeth that would crush its enemies and the people of God. And he saw its horns, kingdoms and powers, and a particularly strange and grotesque image of another horn with its own teeth and its eyes and its mouth, displacing other horns from the head of this beast and speaking arrogantly against God. These beasts aren't all unfamiliar images, representing powerful animals and creatures in God's creation. And in the ancient Near East world, it often was a picture of gods or kingdoms. But this fourth beast, I think, is unrecognizable, and it's troubling. And Daniel is distressed. In fact, he's so distressed that when we come to the second half of the story, we see that Daniel only wants to ask the one standing there with him in his dream about this fourth beast and its horn. Even though in the midst of this vision and then after the four beasts have risen, the scene has dropped away, the sea disappears, and the beasts stand before the throne of the Ancient of Days. And they're silenced and they're destroyed, and the kingdom's handed over to the Son of Man. Even in the midst of this great picture of reversal and of threat and of vindication and victory and justice, at the end of the dream, Daniel's first question is, verse 16, I asked him the true meaning of all this, and the angel replies and tells him about the four beasts being four kingdoms. But then, verse 19, then I wanted to know the true meaning of the fourth beast. He was different. This beast Verse 19, crushed and devoured its victims. And the horns on its head came up, and the horn that looked more imposing than the others, which had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully, this horn, verse 21, was waging war against the saints and defeating them. Daniel wants to know what this fourth beast is. What does it mean? And what does this horn mean that can speak boastfully against the Ancient of Days? And so this messenger, this person with him in his dream who's going to interpret it for him, he explains to Daniel that these horns are kingdoms, and this fourth horn, this fourth beast and its last horn is the final kingdom. And it's going to be a time of great distress where God gives this beast power. And he's allowed to terrify, oppress, and destroy the saints who will be handed over in verse 25 for a time and half a time. Even though this beast is going to be destroyed, this kingdom destroyed, and the inheritance handed over to God's people, in a final scene where all power and authority is given to them, look at Daniel's response in verse 28. This is the end of the matter. I, Daniel, was deeply troubled by my thoughts, and my face turned pale. But I kept the matter to myself. Well, at least he did initially, but thankfully, in God's providence, this message went out to his people. He's written down his vision, his dream, and the interpretation of his dream that the messenger had given him. But even after the explanation's been given, Daniel, who started out troubled, is still deeply troubled and distressed. Why give this vision to Daniel and to his readers at this time? The readers who are in exile, who've been there for many, many years now, who've suffered exile and dislocation from their country and their family, the death of family members and friends, stripped of access to God and his temple. They've suffered oppression and pressure to conform and to worship other gods and other kings. They have grief and loss and certainly fear. And this is the vision that comes to Daniel to write down for those people. Many people have tried to understand what the exact details of this apocalyptic imagery is trying to reveal to us, and whether we can locate these events in history. Certainly there seems to be a progression over the next few kingdoms. We've got the Babylonians and the Persians and the Greeks and the Romans leading up to the great victory of the Son of Man on the cross. But we know from the rest of the New Testament that the victory on the cross and the disarming of the powers in Jesus' death and resurrection is not the end, and that there are beasts and kingdoms and powers against God's people that will continue until Jesus comes once more. Why does God reveal to Daniel and to his readers this picture of the future with so much death and destruction? I think there's two reasons here. There's two ways in which this will help Daniel's readers, both then and now. And the first one is that it confirms our experience. It confirms our experience living in a world full of brokenness and threat, full of sin and destruction, full of grief and loss. It confirms our experience. And for those of God's people who have lived throughout the ages in hostile kingdoms under hostile powers, they experience this firsthand. And it affirms and confirms to them that this is to be expected. It confirms their experience, and for those who haven't experienced this kind of threat, it shapes our expectations. It shapes our expectations. I was taking a walk with my family, our exercise for the day, walking in our close little group along the foreshore of the lake near our house, as we do most evenings. And conversation invariably turns to the events of the day and the issues at hand. And my youngest son, very quickly after leaving the house yesterday, he turned to me and he said, "Dad, what do you think it's going to be like when I'm an adult? What do you think it's going to be like when I'm an adult?" How do I answer that? What expectation do I have of my son's immediate future, of his future over the next 10, 20, 30 years? I told him I wasn't sure. I told him I thought maybe the events that surround COVID would be very different, that our life would go back to something that doesn't look like today, with a little more freedom. But I think I also said, and I'm not sure he heard me, although he is quite attentive, there'll be something else going on. This might have passed in the next 5, 10 years. Maybe it's something that's in our distant history. Maybe much sooner, but something else might arise. Today is also a strange day for me and my family. We have 3 birthdays in our immediate family: my father-in-law, my father, and my brother-in-law, all today, and we're Zooming and calling and trying to catch up with them as best we can. And my dad, reflecting on this experience, said it reminds him of being a boy, probably no older than my youngest son, and his family reflecting on World War II, and him thinking nothing like that was ever going to happen in his lifetime. Daniel 7 confirms our experience, and it shapes our expectations. All of us have questions about the future, some of them concerning this year. What does the end of this year look like? Will our kids go back to school? Will we have certain freedoms? Will the economy be affected? Will our jobs be affected? When can we go on a proper vacation? All of us have questions about the near future, and Daniel 7's not giving us the answer to that. Daniel 7's letting us see the arc of history. And the arc of history from that time forward gets worse overall for God's people. Their safety isn't guaranteed. The 4th beast rises, and he's given power to destroy. And before him came beast after beast after beast, and Daniel is troubled. For those of us, and for many of us living here and living in this age, we have I think a hope that things and an expectation that things will just get better. Improvements in our lifestyle, in health, in resources, in technology. All certainly true. Lots of great advances. And yet we're reminded now that the long arc of history is not that things get endlessly better, but that our safety is not guaranteed. Daniel 7, though, isn't just telling us that things are going to get worse. It isn't just telling us things are going to get worse. It gives us a far and distant glimpse. Going back a few years now, I remember being on an airplane, a flight to or from Chicago. It was 2012. And there was a movie, and I've stolen the title of the movie for this sermon. It's a little quirky independent film called Safety Not Guaranteed. And I won't give it away. I really don't like it when people give away the endings of stories and books. In fact, my wife and I are very different in this situation. She likes to know how a story turns out. She doesn't mind people talking about the movies and giving you the ending. And even when she's reading books, she'll often go to the very last page. Some of you are probably nodding at this point. You read the last page of a novel. I just don't get it. I just don't understand. So I'm not going to give it away for you. I'll just give you the premise of the movie. And the premise of the movie is that there's an ad put out in the back of a paper, and it's a small ad that says something like, partner for time travel wanted, bring your own weapons, safety not guaranteed. And there's a post box or some kind of address to go to. And I won't tell you what happens. You should watch the movie. It's quirky and it's a bit of fun. But by the very nature of that little ad, there's no sense in which anyone knows where you're going to end up. Bring your own weapons. I'm not sure how this will turn out. Come and join me. Safety not guaranteed. Daniel 7's not just telling us to come along, I'm not sure how this is going to turn out. This is the one time I don't mind turning to the back of the book and reading the last page. We have the last page. And the vision here wants us to focus our eyes and our attention right at the center of the dream. The poetic language captured in your Bibles by the different structuring of those verses sets verses 9 and 10 apart as the centerpiece. In the midst of this raging sea and turmoil, which pictures all of the forces and chaotic forces against God and his people, and the beasts which have risen out of the sea, Daniel sees this. Thrones were set in place. The Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was as white as wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000s times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. And he gave authority, verse 14, to the Son of Man who stood before him. He gave authority, glory, sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion was an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will not be destroyed. The last page, that God's King, the Son of Man, comes and receives an eternal kingdom. And did you notice what he did with this eternal kingdom and its greatness and its power and authority? Did you notice what Daniel said happened? What the messenger reported to him? Cast your eye over to verse 26. The court will sit, and the power of the final horn will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of the kingdoms under the whole of heaven will be handed over to the saints, the ones who stand with the Son of Man, the people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. We're given the last page. I don't want us to miss that Daniel's responses twice over in this chapter, and it finishes with him deeply troubled by what lies ahead. And I think that confirms our experience. It validates the trouble and the grief and the loss and the heartache that God's people will experience in the midst of the story. Page after page, where each page feels the same. where it looks like it's not going to end. Daniel's distress, where he turns pale and deeply troubled, confirms our experience. It's okay. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be anxious. It's okay to worry about the future. But chapter 7 wants to give us more, not just to confirm our fear. It wants us to turn our eyes to the final page. We know from last week that there is no contest. We know that there is no battle. When the Son of Man comes, he will reign supreme. He will take all authority and power and a great inheritance and hand it over to his people. We live now in the in-between. In between the no contest and not quite over. We wait. We wait for the Son of Man who has come and had great victory over the powers. We wait for the Son of Man to come and bring his inheritance to his people. And while our safety is not guaranteed, our future with him is fixed. Daniel 7 affirms our experience, and it shapes our expectations. It assures us that the one who holds our future also holds us now. He will bring his people into a sure inheritance. While our safety is not guaranteed, our future is fixed. The one who holds our future also holds us now.